6 months ago, I set up my very first ant vivarium. It was very exciting, but it wasn't without its challenges. A lot has happened in the last half year and I almost lost the entire vivarium several times to unwelcome and unexpected intruders. You'll find out what all of this did to the ants and how they are doing today in this video. Enjoy! Do you remember the mysterious fly from that video? Unfortunately, it was a bad omen. As some of you correctly identified in the comments, these are fungus gnats. They must have entered the vivarium through the plants. It's almost impossible to avoid, but it can have nasty consequences for our entire setup. Do you see the small white lines? Those are fungus gnat larvae. They feed on the roots of our plants and, if not stopped, can become a huge plague in no time. Fungus gnats only live for a few days, but just before they die, they lay up to 300 eggs, which hatch after just 2 days. These 300 larvae then feast on our plants until they briefly pupate after 2 to 3 weeks and then lay eggs again as adult fungus gnats. So if just one fungus gnat lays 300 eggs, in the worst case scenario, these 300 eggs produces 300 more fungus gnats, we'll have a population of 300. In the following generation, that could be up to 90,000. So you can see how critical the situation is and that we need to do something about it before our vivarium is completely destroyed. Plan B is yellow sticky traps. These sticky surfaces attract the flies and hopefully the lower parts are slippery enough that the ants can climb them. But the fungus gnats, they aren't the only newcomers. Here we have another one. This millipede suddenly appeared and wasn't bothered by anything. I had never seen one of this kind before and had no idea what it was. I immediately worried about what damage it could cause. Maybe it's harmful to the ants and could even kill them, or maybe it eats their brood and destroys the colony that way. There are also millipedes that feed on plant parts, posing an even greater threat to our young plants. After a bit of research, I found out that it's an Oxidus gracilis, also known as the greenhouse millipede. It originally comes from Asia but was introduced to Europe through the plant trade and has multiplied especially in greenhouses, hence the name. For our plants, however, it's harmless and it's not interested in the ants either. Its diet mainly consists of dead plant material, which in our case might even make it a beneficial creature, since that's exactly why we intentionally integrated the springtails and white isopods. It does secrete an unpleasant smelling substance when threatened, but it's harmless. The only thing that could become difficult is that they can multiply rapidly, but we only have one here, so that surely won't cause any problems, right? I had mixed feelings about this creature, but I decided to go with it. I wanted a natural vivarium, so I can't complain when it actually comes to life. As for the cockroach remains, the springtails and white isopods were busy devouring them as planned. And it was great to see that our intended cleanup crew was fully on the job. At least one thing was going according to plan, so that was one less worry. From time to time I could see the ants exploring, but I could never really see where they were coming from. They still had their old nest, which is covered with foil, but they rarely visited it anymore. Unfortunately, I kept seeing fungus gnats mating. I was getting very concerned. They were also too nimble to catch by hand, and I had to move the sticky traps to the lid because an ant had managed to climb one and died. On the ceiling, however, far fewer fungus gnats got caught in the traps due to the distance. The ants rarely showed themselves, but if I placed food near the front glass, I could observe them at night. This was very tricky because they are shy in a small colony, and I didn't want to scare them away with a bright light. Consequently, many of the shots of the ants are darker than usual. I repeatedly tried to get them to reveal their nest entrance by offering portable food items. but as animals are, it didn't work out as planned, and the ants of course did everything but what I wanted them to do. Sometimes it was more like watching a cat that has stuck its head in a tube and can't get it out. But it seems to taste good, and as long as the ants are doing well, we are doing well. And what do we have here? It's our snail again. Or is it a different one? It seemed to be enjoying the food as well, and we'll be seeing more from it later. But do you see the ants here carrying a piece of food? Surely it will crawl back to the colony with it now, right? Well, wrong. It took a drink from the condensation and enjoyed its all-inclusive discount. Meanwhile, the struggle with the cockroach leg continued, and it seemed like significant progress was being made. Now I had to be quick. I knew their nest was here somewhere, but I had searched for several hours, and suddenly there it was. The ant disappeared into an opening that was practically invisible. It's really no wonder I didn't find it. It doesn't look like an opening at all, but you have no idea how my heart leaped when I finally knew where to look. The cockroach leg was apparently no longer relevant and was probably brought home more like a grocery bag that others can now access. The mystery of a nest entrance was now solved, and I was puzzled by the location. It could have been hiding deep in the soil, but it's right against the glass. The best hiding spot is probably right where no one would expect it. The millipede also had a hiding spot, constantly squeezing into the gap between the glass and the soil. As long as it's just relaxing peacefully next to the other creatures, we won't be bothered by it. In the meantime, the white isopods wasted no time and helped themselves to the abandoned cockroach leg. Bon appétit. A few weeks have now passed and the sticky traps are filling up, but when we remember that one of them can lay 300 eggs, it's still not enough. An unexpected help was the escape barrier. The gnats seem to get stuck on this as well. Interesting that it not only deters ants but also fights fungus gnats. However, the numbers here were also alarming. I constantly saw their presence, almost as if they were mocking the sticky trap. It was very clear that the steps taken so far would not be sufficient. So I brought out my secret weapon. These are Hippoaspis miles. They are small predatory mites, and these ones eat fungus gnat larvae and die off once there's no more food. Accordingly, I removed the sticky traps after one last set inspection and sprayed the ground. Fungus gnats lay their eggs in moist soil, which is why I tried to let the top layer dry out. This unfortunately killed all our moss, but it was a calculated loss if it meant we could fight the fungus gnats. The predatory mites will feel at home in the now moist soil. The gnats will be able to lay eggs more easily again, but this might just mean more food for the mites. I couldn't help but admire again how beautiful the droplets looked on the plants. The very plants we are trying to protect here. If we can't manage it now, things will get critical. There are also nematodes. They are also suitable for combating fungus gnats larvae, but they also infest ants and would probably mean the direct demise of the entire colony. We tried drying out the soil in vain, and sticky traps were also futile. So if the predatory mites can't do it, we'll be in big trouble. Sometimes it takes the smallest of helpers to save something very big. I distributed the predatory mites throughout the rainforest Vivarium in the hope that they would spread out and at least a few would find their way into the layers with the fungus gnat larvae. The substrate didn't look so much like a rainforest, but it wasn't super terrible either, and it was a price I was willing to pay for our plants. The ants must have been confused about what's happening here. All their scent trails and paths were a thing of the past, and I wondered if it's comparable to waking up and finding everything outside covered in snow. Unfortunately, we can't read ant thoughts yet, but until then, that remains my guess. Worried that the predatory mites wouldn't feel at home, I gave everything another shower. I also dared to water the plants properly again. During my attempt to dry out the fungus gnat larvae, I had always been cautious with that. The silhouette of the ants was revealed by hundreds of lens-like droplets, but you could clearly see their presence. How they climbed around on the plants was as beautiful as ever. One more reason to save these plants. And then there was nothing left for me to do but hope and wait. What I found in response was unexpected and somehow confusing. The moisture fogged up the glass, and I found these strange tracks scattered everywhere, almost like race tracks. It's just ironic that this track leads me to the slowest inhabitant of our vivarium. Small snails were on their crusade through the vivarium, and I do mean small. You see the big one here, but do you also see the small one on the left? The snail from the beginning was obviously able to reproduce, or our material already came with more snail eggs. However it happened, we now seem to have a thriving snail population in the vivarium as well. I mostly know snails to eat plants, but these ones I almost exclusively saw feasting on the cockroaches, just like the ants and isopods. I still need to identify what species this is. Can you perhaps help me with that? And should I be worried? Snail populations can explode too, so we need to find out as soon as possible. But I was granted no peace. My Tetramorium bicarinatum colony broke out and was searching everywhere for entrances to the vivarium. A few had even managed to squeeze through the cracks and were about to establish themselves inside. Countless ants were scattered everywhere, and if even one queen settles in the vivarium, she could dominate the entire setup unnoticed in a very short time. Our Camponotus habereri wouldn't stand a chance. We must intervene immediately. Carefully and thoroughly, I used my soft tweezers to fend off the invaders one by one. Due to the small size of the ants, this was quite tedious, but I couldn't let a single one escape. Once I was sure I had successfully repelled the attack, I took some paraffin oil. Most ants can't cross this because they can't get a grip. I'm now applying this barrier to the outside as well to prevent further ants from potentially attacking the vivarium. Because even though we repelled the current workers, more kept coming. The desert vivarium was surprisingly spared. Something special about the rainforest setting must have attracted them. The breakout wasn't just here, but in my entire ant room. I fully documented that, and you can see how I fought off the breakout and got it under control, and the video I'll link for you at the end. You can continue watching right there. Calm and relaxed. I couldn't find any foreign ants in the vivarium over the next few days, but I did find this little millipede again. In this unique view, you can wonderfully admire how its numerous legs function and harmonize individually. And in case you were wondering how the ants are supplied with water and carbohydrates, here you can see a worker at the feeder. One feeder for water and the other for sugar water. For aesthetics, I usually take them out for the recordings. I'm still thinking about elegant solutions, but they are there and the ants have everything they need. And seeing them with a big appetite at the cockroaches was also reassuring. The coloring of a gaster is a real eye-catcher, and the sweet coexistence of the white isopods and the curious ants just feels right. Workers feeding like this is also an indication of brood being raised. Accordingly, we can assume that the colony continues to lay eggs and grow. You never know for sure, but it's a good sign. And if you look at the glass, you can see just how incredibly many white isopods of all sizes there are. To think that all of these originated from just a few isopods also shows how well they are doing. It's really great that things are working out and we are not just fighting battles. At first, I thought I wasn't seeing things right. And then I thought there was a fight going on, but I was wrong on both counts. To my absolute astonishment, we didn't just have one millipede in the vivarium, there were at least two, and they seemed to like each other very, very much. Remember when I said one millipede of this kind is no problem, but if they reproduce, it gets critical? Well, now it's critical. You already know what kind of species it is, but when I filmed it, I didn't know yet. This, however, was the moment I started the research and learned what you already know. But in the meantime, these intertwined creatures were already finished with their intimate dance, in which apparently all their little legs were involved and were no longer to be found by me. I had to remove them, but they had finished into thin air. The ants obviously weren't bothered by the millipedes, but we now had a problem. If they reproduce, the vivarium will not only be besieged by fungus gnats and attacking ants, but also threatened by a horde of millipedes. I had to find them, but just when you're looking, you can't find them. We have arrived at the present. 6 months have passed and our plants have clearly grown. So where do we stand today? Obviously, the ants are still alive, but observing them has unfortunately become really difficult. The entire edges are covered by the fungus gnats and the escape barrier is obviously no longer effective. The lid is dirty and desperately needs some love. But the fungus gnats are gone. The predatory mites seem to have made short work of them. Admittedly, this took quite a while, but I used few predatory mites and often several treatments are necessary. Now that we no longer have to worry about fungus gnats, it's time to do a clean sweep here. Now the ants are also more active than ever. The once shy ants are now active during the day, which tells me that the colony has grown larger and thus more confident. So this is going to be a bit tricky. We also have deceased workers in the vivarium from time to time. This is okay and normal in small numbers, so I'm not worried about that. But it doesn't look nice. And just as I wanted to take a closer look, I found what I had been looking for a long time. One of our millipedes, completely carefree and with all the calm in the world. It was in its element, unaware that we had it in our sights. Carefully and making sure no ants escaped, I seized the opportunity and the millipede. There was little resistance and the action was over quickly. And what you don't know is that this is the second one I'm removing. I removed the first one quickly when I found it. A few weeks earlier, I was able to grab it as well, and thus we have saved our vivarium from this challenge too. The danger is officially averted, unless they've already left offspring somewhere. Now we have time to look at the back. The plant had elegantly wound its way along the back panel. Here you can also see wonderfully how it's spreading. I'm sure you could probably take a cutting from any point here and the individual plant parts would survive separately. With our action, we have obviously startled the ants and they had to briefly show their presence and demonstrate that this is their land, where we have no business. With the ants being so active, we had to work around them. As nimble as they are, you couldn't underestimate them. But seeing the mess finally disappear is worth every effort. It's becoming really presentable again. I also took the opportunity to give the glass a little wipe in general. Not without fanning off the ants here and there. Luckily, they are so robust that falling from this height doesn't bother them, and they crawl on immediately. But I still had to hurry. Since my attention was focused on cleaning, I couldn't keep an eye on 3 or 4 ants in all directions at the same time. But what you can keep an eye on is an organ donor card. Not only is this generally important and everyone should have one, but it also helps me time and time again with ant keeping. Instead of removing the dead ants from the site, I used the card with a bit of finesse to push them back into the vivarium. We have the white isopods that are supposed to feed on exactly that, so why not let them have what they're entitled to? If there were a lot, one might decide differently, but here it's only 2 or 3. As I'm showing here, the ants are still scattered everywhere, waiting for their chance. I couldn't remove the air plant because its roots have firmly anchored themselves in the wood, but with a bit of skill skill, I was able to work around it. And do you see how intelligent the ants are? While I'm fending off the same worker in the front, a second one takes the opportunity and jumped out of the vivarium. Luckily, I noticed it right away and was lucky when grabbing for the ant. These ants are so fast that you really shouldn't let them run free in your apartment. I left the lid closed for now and turned my attention to it by spraying it with distilled water and removing the dust. That was a good feeling, and regaining more insight with every wipe was great. The stoppers had to be removed briefly, but that was a much smaller problem than opening the entire lid. I did the same with the underside under constant observation of the ants. From their perspective, all of this must be absolutely crazy, and it didn't take long for the lid to offer a full view again. The rim was as fresh as new, and we could observe the ants undisturbed again, without having to look through the remains of hundreds of fungus gnats. The workers seemed as pleased as I was and explored the changes. These white streaks on the side were still bothering me though, so I gave the sides a little shower as well and removed all the residue left behind by months of crawling. Now we had a full view of the ground and the surroundings again. A perfect moment to check what has actually been in the old test tube all this time. And surprise, it's empty! In the beginning, the ants retreated here more often, but I haven't seen them here for several months. In the meantime, some springtails were to be found here, but the springtails seem to have completely disappeared. Overall, it looked unsightly, and I'm glad to finally be able to remove it from the vivarium. This way, the vivarium can finally shine without this eyesore, and our lapis lazuli can unfold its colors. It also seemed a bit like we had awakened something slumbering in the earth. But it's just the white isopods lurking beneath the surface, who have become curious due to the moist soil from cleaning. They usually hide just below the surface and also use, for example, this feeding dish to relax in the slightly moisture environment underneath. Since it's summer now, I no longer need the readings for temperature and humidity and am removing our measuring device. But now, of course, a new escape barrier is needed, which immediately shows its effect. We can perfectly observe the ant as it wants to go higher but can't manage it. And did you know that some ant species can jump? Not all of them, but this species definitely can. I've observed this many times and was very surprised the first time. Now that we can open the vivarium without risk, we can also film this better. And how they darted and how they climbed along the plants and the wood was as cool as ever. The air plant has developed wonderfully in the 6 months and has grown significantly. Its roots are stable and almost immovable connected to the wood. We won't be getting it out of here anytime soon. Our bromeliad has split at the top and is as beautiful as on the first day. I can hardly get enough of the pink-green mixture. But when looking at the overall picture, the moss stands out. As mentioned, it unfortunately died during the fight against the fungus gnats. It had no chance in the dryness. But here we have something that will feel at home nonetheless. Our old friends, the tropical springtails. I assume the predatory mites also had these on their menu, or the dryness got them too. Either way, we are bringing them back, because now we have to fear neither fungus gnats nor dryness. The little critters will gladly feast on the dead plant material and take care of cleanliness. So that all the springtails, isopods and plants feel comfortable, there was now a little rain shower for everyone. The inhabitants haven't had it this nice and moist in a long time, and how beautiful the colors come out when everything is wet always excites me. The ants jump back and forth happily in the puddles like children after the rain. After 6 months of hardship, they've well and truly earned it. I'll keep you updated, and next we will renovate and beautify the entire vivarium. I hope you will stay around for it. Ciao.